Okay, welcome to this edition of the Foreman Boxing Magazine here again at the Choice. But today I want to throw in a couple of extras, I should say. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor who's letting us from now on use this place as a broadcast. Vibes, the lounge here in the Choice, and Ali Williams. We thank you for your participation and letting us uh, do our broadcast from here. It's the shore, of course, at Atlantic City, so it's kind of hard to go wrong. And so, those of you that are on Facebook, I say hello. Let me say hello to my friends in Boise, Idaho, Mike Nikitas, Hank Boyson, oh, Dusty Valentine, Jamie Biggs. Let me say hello to all of them. And my friends in California, Virgil Robinson, Ray Clark, just to name a few. And of course, my main man down in Texas, Star Johnson, Reggie Johnson, the former light heavyweight champion of the world. New York, I got Robert Ellis. I get emails from people in Texas from all over the place. So I'm probably not going to get everybody, but just to those to let you know, we thank you for tuning in and we hope you enjoyed the show this evening. I've got a couple of things I'm going to talk about in the world of boxing. And I want to say before I get started, I'm kind of really happy to have a young man that's visiting us today by the name of Eddie Morgan. If you're from Atlantic City, I don't have to. Probably if you're from New Jersey, really, I don't have to tell you who he is. One of the greatest musicians here in the area. He's been there for a long time. He's played almost everywhere you can think of here. He's just told me he's retiring, not from music, but he's retiring from teaching, where he's been teaching the young kids in a place called Pleasantville, New Jersey, for about the last 20 some odd years. I'm sure he took 38 years just to get it corrected. So, congratulations to him and for helping out great deal of many of the young kids, of which I'm sure he has. Uh, Mike Murray, hello to you, and Fred Colbert, Suzanne out there in Dallas. Say, listen, every week, I get a email, somebody sends me a reply. About a few weeks ago, I gave out who I thought was the top 10 greatest fighters of all time. Now, I didn't say the all-time greatest fighters of all time. I said top 10. And the two guys that they said I neglected, which I did not neglect them, as I said again, was Evander Holyfield and Roy Jones Jr. As you can see, I'm wearing a Roy Jones Jr. t-shirt. Is definitely one of my favorite fighters, not the favorite fighter of mine of all time, especially in boxing. He's one of the second guy to move up from the light heavyweight ranks and win the heavyweight division alongside after Michael Spinks. So Roy definitely was one of the greatest fighters of all time. My top 10, not so much. Uh, but greatest fighter in the light heavyweight division, no doubt. Like I said before, Archie Moore, Bob Foster. I included Michael Spinks. Then I guess I say Roy Jones Jr. And it always comes down to people say, well, how do you know who's better than others? Because this guy beating this guy, athletes trained different in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s than they did today. They had a lot more things that they advantaged. Today, with the different types of barbells that they have, and just all the nutritional things that they did, I don't think that takes away from the determination of what a fighter does, though, especially a professional fighter. Roy Jones Jr. had the hand speed of Sugar Ray Robinson, no doubt about that, and the power of a Bob Foster, the footwork of Sugar Ray Leonard. So, I mean, when you look at him, there's no doubt that he's considered one of the greatest fighters of all time. But today, well, first few minutes before I answer some of the other questions you sent me, we're going to talk about Evander Holyfield, the real deal. Now, Holyfield was a fighter that I guess when you look at it, he started out with the Olympics behind him. He represented the Olympics, United States in 1984 and 1984 Olympics, which I was a part of, and I was glad to see it. I couldn't stay for the whole event, but I was there because we had something that happened, so I had to leave. But Evander Holyfield was, at the start of his career, he was more well known, I think, for what happened to him in the Olympics. If you remember this, and if you're old enough, or if you check this out, Evander was disqualified in the 1984 Olympics because he threw a punch at the same time that the referee called stop, halt, whatever the word they used. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it's a break, I think it's what it was. He throws a punch that was impossible to bring back. So what happens? He gets disqualified. Now, if you don't provide, or if you're on Facebook, understand, I said he was disqualified. He didn't lose. He was disqualified. But because it was in the finals there, in the semifinals, he was awarded the bronze medal. So when he came into professional boxing, I think he was a fighter that had a chip on his shoulder because he had to show everybody that I can be good at this. I should have gotten the gold medal, just like what happened to Roy Jones Jr. in the '88 Olympics, how he was robbed of a bad decision too. And Roy came in, I think, with a chip on his shoulder. But at the same time, Evander Holyfield, who was 170, I think he was 172 or something like that in the Olympics, not big, and nobody ever thought he would go on to become a heavyweight champion of the world. But we're going to get to that part. So he started as a light heavyweight. He conquered that. He beat everybody that he faced. As a matter of fact, everyone that they put in front of the real deal, he was the real deal. He showed us this throughout. Then what happens as a light heavyweight, he moves up, decided in his newly created cruiserweight. I think around about 86, 87, they decided to come in with the cruiserweight title because it was thought that a lot of the heavyweights or the light heavyweight guys couldn't make the heavyweight ranks. They weren't moving up, so they created the cruiserweight division. Evander wins. Of course, he moves up. He takes on guys in that division. And he becomes part of that. But at the same time, there was a young man here from Atlantic City, well, from New Jersey, from Camden, matter of fact, called the Camden Buzzsaw, by the name of the White Muhammad Qawi, who had, served some time in prison, a great career himself. He had a background himself. I'm sure he had a lot to prove, but he had served some time in prison. He become a professional fighter, and he went on pretty much to conquer a lot of guys as well. So he won what was called then the Junior Heavyweight Championship of the world, and rather than the cruiserweight. He and Evander Holyfield probably had two of the greatest fights you've ever seen. The first fight, I think, was a split decision, close fight. Some people felt the White Qawi deserved the victory. Of course, it was in Atlanta, so I think it was in Atlanta, but wherever it was, Holyfield got the decision. So basically, it forced a rematch. In the second fight, it wasn't, Holyfield pretty much dominated because that's the type of athlete Evander was. If there ever was a guy seen in the boxing ring who was probably susceptible to being hit, especially with a jab and other things, he wasn't impossible to hit, but Evander Holyfield had this thing about if you jabbed him and you didn't try to hurt him, no problem. But as soon as you went to an issue where you tried to knock him out, you had a fight on your hands. That's the way Evander Holyfield was. That's why I think the name Real Deal fit him more than it did anybody in the sport of boxing or anywhere else. Now, after winning the Cruiserweight Championship, he went on and beat a couple other guys. I think it was Alex Stewart and a couple others, in the heavyweight division. So he's on his way to conquering the heavyweight division. Mike Tyson goes to Tokyo, Japan, and takes on Buster Douglas, which really should have been the fight that everybody thought. And that was my number one upset in boxing of all time. Until something happens, I still don't see that. Because I knew both guys, and nobody expected Buster Douglas to win, but he did. So he goes and loses his title. Now, because Evander was the next man up, he gets a shot at Buster Douglas. Now, hey, there's nowhere in the world Evander's going to beat the guy that just conquered the great Mike Tyson, right? Not wrong. Because what happened? He knocks. He goes over in Vegas. Let's put it like this: where supposedly Buster Douglas had been training for like the last 5 or 6 months. They didn't use the word training, but he comes into the ring and he's like 260, nowhere near the Mike Tyson weight. Evander knocks him out, I think, in the second or third round. Now, Evander comes. He's just conquered the heavyweight division, light heavyweight, cruiserweight, heavyweight. Now, he's not in my top 10, but he's still one of the greatest fighters of all time. Top 20, no doubt. But now he's conquered as I said, light heavyweight, cruiserweight. Now he just conquered the heavyweight division. Evander goes on, gets a couple of other fights. He fights, I think in his first title defense, he fights George Foreman, as a matter of fact, in Atlantic City. Battle of the Ages. Great fight. You had two guys, one guy who's a real heavyweight, and I mean George was a real heavyweight because he was about 250 pounds, so he was a real big heavyweight. Evander came in at 214, decent size, as heavyweights go. They get a 12-round fight that still to this day, a lot of people consider one of the greatest fights in the history of the sport. Now, he beats George. He goes on, he gets another fight in against Larry Holmes, another one of the greatest all-time heavyweight fighters in the history of the sport of boxing. He beats him. Then he gets into a fight with Burt Cooper, who had been a replacement for a fighter that had gotten hurt. So nobody expected that fight to be what it was. Oh, Lord, and behold, Evander finds himself on his knees in the ropes, grabbing. Referee Mills Lanes at the time, a lot of people thought that he stopped the fight when he shouldn't. I mean, he broke the action when he shouldn't have, and he saved the title for Evander Holyfield. Did that change Burt Cooper's life? We don't know. Cooper had fought a couple of other guys and coming up the ring and moving up. George Foreman also as well. So, and he deservedly got a shot at the title, which we were glad to see. But Holyfield holds on to his title. Now comes up the shot that a lot of people have been waiting for him to get, was the fight with Mike Tyson. Well, they signed it. It didn't happen. Why? Tyson went to jail, as you well know, for I think 3 to 5 years, for maybe 3 years, for the alleged rape of, well, he was convicted of the rape for the young girl Desiree Washington, I think it was, out in Indianapolis. So during this time, Evander Holyfield is still ruling the roost. Then comes the fight with the young man out of Maryland, New York, rather. Well, he was living in Maryland, but out of New York, by the name of Riddick Big Daddy Bowe. Now, this was one of the best fights I've seen between heavyweights in a long time, mainly because Big Daddy Bowe was a big guy with good hand speed, hadn't been seriously considered to be a real legitimate heavyweight champion, but a contender all on. Rock Newman had him. Butch Lewis had him before that, but Butch couldn't seem to get Evander to get either Butch didn't have the time for him, or he didn't get the dedication from Riddick that he needed. So he passes him on, and Rock Newman winds up with him, and he gets his shot at the title after a few nondescript wins, as the saying goes, in Vegas. And I tell you, it must have been it was a war, because we sat ringside, and I'm gonna tell you something. I don't know how Evander Holyfield survived some of the shots that he did. But this particular night, Riddick Bowe was destined to become heavyweight champion of the world, because he gets a decision over Evander Holyfield. And then there was another fight that some people thought, the whole thing was, you're a champion, you have to be knocked out or knocked. And he was knocked down, but he wasn't knocked out. But at the same time, Riddick Bowe gets the heavyweight championship of the world. Evander Holyfield didn't go away. Okay. Along again, Riddick gives up the WBC title, and the reason he did was because he said this thing was apartheid, and they supported apartheid in South Africa, so they wanted nothing to do with it. He takes and throws it in the trash can. Then Lewis becomes heavyweight champion of the world. He says, "I'll take it." So he becomes heavyweight champion of the world, right? Guess what? He got to face Evander Holyfield again. Now, everybody, if it ever was a guy, when I tell you he was the smallest outside of Roy Jones of every one of those guys during that period of time. Think about it: 6'5" Riddick Bowe, 6'4" George Foreman, 6'4" Larry Holmes. Burt Cooper may have been the smallest guy he ever faced, so maybe that's why he had so much trouble with him. But everybody was so much bigger than this guy was. So they they have a monstrous fight. Now comes a rematch. Evander Holyfield's no longer the champion, right? We're back in Vegas, and everybody's excited again, because will Evander Holyfield win the title for the second time, right? We at that time, I think we only had maybe 2 or 3 people. Well, 3 actually: Tyson, Holyfield. Well, Tyson, before I get to Holyfield, Muhammad Ali were the guys that had literally lost the title and won it back 2 times especially. So now, on this night, Riddick Bowe kind of does, I call it the Buster Douglas, because he comes in not in the best of shape, but still gifted as he was. He put on a great fight. And then Fan Man thing with this episode where this guy comes in flying around Caesar's Palace on some type of fan thing. They call him the Fan Man. He comes into the ring, and just about this time, and speaking to Riddick Bowe on this, because I asked him, how did you felt that interrupted where you were going? And he felt that just before that happened, he was just starting to get his rhythm. So the fight gets halted, I think, for about 20 minutes because they had to clear the ring and judges had to be done. Everybody, the fighter was wrapped in a coat with a blanket and try to keep their bodies warm. It goes back out, fight finishes, and of course, Evander Holyfield wins the title again for the second time. And the real deal is in the mix. Lennox Lewis pops up next. I guess these guys, again, remember, that was a rematch. First fight was in it, I think, in a Lennox Lewis got the decision. And then in the second fight, Evander Holyfield was considered not so much the favorite because, again, he's fighting a guy like, Lennox Lewis was a big guy. So, again, here's Evander with these chips on his shoulders because he said once before, people always doubted me. Three-time champion, right? He's a three-time heavyweight champion of the world now. Then there comes, he loses the fight again. He gets into a fight with Michael Moore, who was one of his, I think he may have been the mandatory at the time. So he gets into a fight with Michael Moore, who became the first left-handed, southpaw rather, heavyweight champion. And he beats Evander pretty decisively. And a lot of people just felt because Evander had a problem prior to the third fight with Riddick Bowe, Evander had a problem with a heart murmur. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but the doctor said that, that he had a problem, open heart, something like that, the hole in his heart. Anyway, he took some time off because they wanted to heal. And if anybody thought that was the end of Evander Holyfield, you have another story to think about. So Evander comes back again, and he's in the mix. He fights John Ruiz. He gets the title from, I think the title had been stripped, or someone had been stripped with one of the belts, so he gets a chance to fight for the title. And he loses to John Ruiz, but he beats John Ruiz. I'm sorry. Then he loses to John Ruiz in the rematch. And the rematch of that fight, here again, a lot of people just felt that if Evander Holyfield was still on his feet at the end of it, Evander Holyfield deserved to get the victory, but he didn't get it this time. He's still three times heavyweight champion of the world. He gets another shot at the title again, and he wins. Now he becomes the only four-time heavyweight champion of the world is Evander Holyfield. But after that, he takes on a Chris Bird, the young Chris Bird, much faster, a little bit more elusive. And Evander's skills at this time, by many, was considered boxing experts, not by me, but the other boxing experts who considered that his skills were kind of deleted a little bit. New York stripped him of his license. They wouldn't give him one. So he had to wind up taking some fights somewhere else. But he goes on and he wins a couple of other fights. He winds up against Sultan Ibrahimov. And I'm not pronouncing the name right by no means because I'm not Russian and I can't speak it very well. So anyway, he loses to him. Then he fights the big giant, the 7'2" guy, Valuev. And this is a fight that a lot of people thought he won, but he fought him overseas in his hometown, and they took that decision from Evander Holyfield. He went on to win to get into a couple more fights, and maybe won one out of three, but he finally retired, got inducted to the Hall of Fame, and now he's doing some promotional stuff. I understand, a company by the name of Real Deal Promotion or something like that. He travels around, speaks to kids. He has a great story, and that's why when I tell you I didn't neglect Evander Holyfield, and I'm kind of glad that you thought I did because it gave me a chance to talk about just how great he was. He and Riddick Bowe to this day talk about the three fights that they had because throughout history, the boxing history, maybe with the exception, I think, of Ali and Frazier, I can't think of, well, maybe Norton and Ali, that you had three, what they call a three fight. Is that trilogy? There's three of the trilogy, right? Is that three? Teacher, is that three of the trilogy? When you had three fights, right? Not many, especially against qualified opponents like this. Now, you had the lightweight guys who did it in the 30s, 40s, and 50s because there were a lot of times there was no computers and there was no way to check out fighters. But they're up and after about around the 80s and 90s, 1980s and 90s, I should say, not 80s, but 1990s and 80s. You kind of had a chance to, you could review fighters, and fighters just couldn't take fights like they used to. So Evander Holyfield, one of the greatest of all times, no doubt about it. And he's probably number 11 on my list. I haven't thought about 11 yet. I need to do that now, 11 through 20. Maybe I'll say that for another show. But to let you know that Evander Holyfield is considered one of the greatest fighters of all times. And I see some questions are popping up on Facebook, and I'm going to try to get to those before in the next few minutes. But now I want to go to Roy Jones Jr. because Roy Jones Jr. was another guy that started with a chip on his shoulders. Roy was robbed by the what was this in the '88 Olympics, and he fought a guy from, well, it was overseas. It was in Tokyo, not Tokyo. It was in oh man, Hong Kong, somewhere over that way. But it took place overseas in one of those countries. Roy Jones was robbed terribly, terribly. Uh, but I don't even know the fighter's name. But anyway, he didn't get his gold medal. He didn't want to accept the silver medal. And I think someone told me 20 years afterwards that they finally gave him the gold medal they thought he deserved. But I think Roy wanted to stand on that podium and hear the national anthem sang with his name, and with him being on that podium and the national anthem being sung behind him as being the United States and the Olympic middleweight champion. But that didn't happen. But Roy Jones' career got out to a stalling, just like Evander Holyfield. He came in with a chip on his shoulder. Roy won his first fights by knockouts. He was a guy that, like I said, he had the speed of Ray Robinson, the foot movement of Sugar Ray Leonard, and the power of a Bob Foster. I mean, this was a guy that you couldn't hit him. You could not hit him. He had a thing of the way he put his hands, and he could block, he could do everything you could think of. Roy Jones Jr. had it as a fighter. Now, Roy went on, and he, up into his career, he fought regular guys, the contenders, beat them all. Then he gets into a ring. My biggest night with Roy Jones Jr., I think, was when he fought Bernard Hopkins. And Bernard Hopkins is definitely considered one of the greatest fighters of all time. But he's probably in my number 11. He's somewhere near my 10 and 11 list of all-time fighters as well. It's a middleweight. So when he and Roy Jones Jr. fought that night, I'm looking for some fireworks at this one. I'm looking at fireworks because I'm thinking that, Bernard Hopkins was known as the executioner, right? So Bernard comes out that particular night, and after seeing Roy Jones make a few moves in the ring and hit him with punches, we didn't get much from him. Not at all. I was disappointed. Of course, he won the fight, and that was the last fight Bernard Hopkins had lost from the first time he had his first fight. Nobody else had but beaten him, come close to beating him. The other first fight he had lost since his career started. We were talking about Roy Jones Jr. at this time. So Roy goes on, and then he takes on what I consider like Holyfield. He took on some of the greatest fighters in his division. James Toney, who I definitely consider one of the greatest fighters of all time as well. He's still boxing. But Roy went on to conquer the middleweight, super middleweight, and the light heavyweight division. Then, after doing the same thing as Evander Holyfield, he goes up, and guess what? He beats John Ruiz on a night where he wins the heavyweight championship of the world. Now, a lot of people thought that because Roy did all this changing weights, but he still continued to dominate fights in between that, though, before he even got to that. I remember a couple of fights, he actually put guys to sleep in the ring. He fought Virgil Hill, and to this day, the best kidney punch I've ever seen was thrown by Roy Jones Jr. because Virgil Hill did not see it coming. It sounded like a shotgun in Radio City Music Hall that night. Bam! Boom. Yeah, it was. The fight was over with. So Roy Jones Jr. is another one that's definitely one of the greatest fighters of all time. In the light heavyweight division, like I said, you got Archie Moore, you got Bob Foster, you got Michael Spinks, you got Roy Jones Jr. I mean, how do you go bad? You don't go bad with either one, even though I still consider Archie one of the greatest. So that's just my opinion on the two of the greatest heavyweights, light heavyweights, middleweight fighters of all time, Roy Jones Jr. and Evander Holyfield. Now, a couple of questions. I got some on Facebook, and I got some in the audience that I'm getting from Eddie Morgan. But he's asking me, do I see any bigger fights coming to Atlantic City? It's a shame that it doesn't happen, or it hasn't happened since. I think the last big fight we may have had was in 2000, and I want to say 8, but Bernard Hopkins fought Kelly Pavlik. May have been the last one. No, it wasn't. He lost to the fight that Bernard. He lost to the young man that's lost to Andre Ward a couple of times. The cruiserweight, the light heavyweight. It'll come back to me in a minute. But that was the last major fight that we've had here. Now, the young lady, Clarissa Shields, who's the 2-time Olympic gold medalist, from Detroit, or Flint rather. I want to make sure I get that right. She won 2 gold medals, but she had a fight here back in January, which my understanding was one of the first big fights to be broadcast on HBO, with featuring a woman rather, as the main event. But what happened in between this and 2000, I would say probably 2002, was a lot of it had to do with the failure of the casinos to properly hold on to their promotional end of this. In the 1986 to about 2000, the casinos in Atlantic City carried some of the biggest fights you could ever see here. I mean, in the history of the sport, there's just so many. It was a matter of participation then. You had Tyson, who basically made a home here, and he brought in crowds that was tremendous. Bernard Hopkins, Arturo Gatti. These guys brought in people that was just, people that, if they brought in stars, as people like to call them. They brought in the stars. They came to see these guys fight. Oscar De La Hoya, George Foreman, Larry Holmes. Like, you name them, they were here. During that period of time, as it dropped off, my one reasoning is, I believe, because they left here, they went to Vegas. I think part of it had to do with, and I'll say part one to it, had a lot to do with the state taxes that we talked. And I had actually spoken to some of the government people who were back in during that time. There was under, I think, Governor Christie, and I forget the other. There was a guy that was before him, and even some of Governor Corzine people. And I figured that if we was to do the boxing the way they did with some of the NFL teams and the baseball teams, to give them some type of tax abatement when they fight here, rather than taking 3 to 5% of all that money in the television the week here in Atlantic City. That was money that the people that worked, the dealers on the tables made money, everybody, So I was thinking, my thinking was, let's try to see if we can get them to do. And if you're on Facebook, I don't know whether we're having some problems or something, but we're trying to reconnect with if you're on Facebook. But that part of the project, rather. So what happened? They started to put the fights in Vegas, tax-free, right? No state, at least no state income tax, because Uncle Sam's going to get his. I think that was the first part. The other part was during the 80s and 90s, the casinos were pretty much run by multiple corporate interests, Bally's and Caesars, of course, corporation. Trump owned I think 3 or 4 casinos here at the time. Like him or hate him or like him, love him or hate him, however it goes. He was one of the most intricate parts to boxing becoming big here in the Atlantic City area. I mean, that's just the way it was. He used his casinos. They call him one of the greatest self-promoters in the business world. Well, he was. That's what he was. He did a great job of bringing people in. And my understanding is that during the heavyweight title fights on a weekly basis, because then fighters used to come in for a week or 10 days. They trained here. People came out and seen it. But they told me on an average that, because I used to seek these numbers from the casinos, and during that week there was at least an uptake, I think what they call it in the casino, upsurge or whatever it is, of about $60 million extra that week when people came into town, because again, they had open work out of it. The other part is the casinos in the states rather started bringing gaming to outside of Atlantic City. Foxwood opened up something. Then Pennsylvania got into the game. Upstate New York got into the game. Well, when you took away what the attraction was, the main attraction, even though during the summer, you had the shore here. That was during the summertime, you could have nothing going on. A frog contest is going to bring people to the shore down here. That's just the way it is. But during that period of time, the shore was attractive. Then people said, there's a big boxing match, so let's go to that as well. And that's what it was. You had those fights that came in. People came from all over the world, not just from the States here, but from London. Hamed came here, and he excited the crowd here for a couple of fights. I mean, it was just amazing. And I think that with the participation of the casinos, which we just don't seem to get these days here in Atlantic City, is the reason that you're going to have a hard time bringing big fights here. Because it has to be sponsored. It has to be produced by a casino that's willing to come in and do something. I remember I spoke to a representative from Tillman Fertitta who owns the Golden Nugget, and he's invested heavily in casinos in Biloxi, Mississippi. I think in Louisiana somewhere, and of course out in Las Vegas. And of course he owns a Golden Nugget here. But he also just bought the Houston Rockets about a year or so ago, the Houston Rockets basketball team. A sportsman. And we just don't seem to have that many these days that seem to be participating in the sport. I think the guy up in New York that owns Barclay Arena, he seems to have fallen into it. He does a lot of shows up that way. The Garden doesn't seem to carry as much. So the East Coast itself, with the exception of a couple of fights, are really taking a lick. But Atlantic City needs to get back into it. And I think that the city fathers here, the ones who run this city, need to seriously start looking at what made this city the dynamite that it was through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And the other part is, I think we just don't have the fighters anymore. There's not much charisma to these guys. I mean, people are excited about Tyson Fury. Okay. And he's a showman. I guess the other night he came in his Rocky shorts and he said he wants to be an American champion as well. Want to see if he wins the title. Yeah, okay, you can go for him. But you take away the guys like Floyd Mayweather, who's retired, I guess now. Manny Pacquiao seemed to be the biggest name out here. Errol Spence, young and up and coming, but I don't think he's ever fought here. Andre Ward is retired. It's just no names. There's not a fighter out here now that you can say their name and people will actually know he's the champion. Andy Ruiz just won the heavyweight title from Anthony Joshua 3 weeks ago. And I haven't heard that talked about one time since then. I don't know if he's been on any television shows or been promoted or whatever, but I do think that one of the reasons that we're lacking so much, and even though some of the numbers tend to reflect that boxing is doing good rather overall from a television part rather, but the local shows, they don't seem to be getting the impact because we just don't have the fighters right now. And is it the promoters' fault? Is it the fighters' fault? I don't know. The newspapers don't write about it. There's an MMA section, but I don't think there's an NFL, the Major League Baseball. There's not a boxing section. It used to be. It's gone now. So let's hope that we've got a young man here, Vinny LaManna, his family, the LaManna family. They're promoting shows on a regular basis. Golden Boy has a show here this week, I think Thursday or Friday night here in town. A small show, evidently, but it's being streamed. It's not being televised, but it is being streamed just like we are now. So you get a chance to perhaps see that. But we need more of those involvement. But we need people that's involved in the sport to take a lot more interest in Atlantic City as well, so that we can get a chance to make that we deserve right here in Atlantic City. And that's the answer to that question. Now, one of my other questions I constantly get is I get my emails, and you can reply to us on Facebook at providetv.com on Facebook, or you can go to royforeman.com, www.royforeman.com, and you can leave a reply as you've been doing before. My email is roroboxing12@yahoo.com. But one of the other questions I seem to get is that the promoters that's running the sport, people seem to think that the promoters and the association or the affiliation with the other boxers that's involved more than promoting the sport of boxing. They seem to be doing more to just trying to enhance the organization, whether it be the WBC, IBF, WBO, WBA. One of my biggest things is, and before I get to the Hall of Fame question as well, because I had a couple of people ask me about my criteria, what I thought about the Hall of Fame, but is that very few of these organizations, I think that the WBA a few years ago started something supposedly to help fighters. I know that they had an auction out in Vegas that I attended a couple of years ago that the watch company, what is the big watch company, they were one of the sponsors with that. And they attempted to raise $1 million. And I think they did right at $975,000. And somebody came in and threw the rest on the top. But they raised $1 million. And this money is supposed to go towards helping fighters. Ring 10 in New York is supposed to be doing the same thing. I don't have an issue with those guys doing that. My issue is what overall are the organizations doing for the fighters? Now, boxers don't have insurance even while they're boxing. As a matter of fact, you have to carry your own insurance. It's not so easy because you're in what they call a high-risk sport, right? Like football, but the premiums are expensive, and most of the young fighters can't afford to pay it. So you're in a high risk sport. Now I'm hoping, and I've been talking for the last week, I've been talking for the last 20 years about getting an association, putting something together to help these fighters. But the one thing I have been able to do is to get in contact with some politicians down in the state of Texas. And we're in the process. And and I want to think this has a lot to do with a couple of fighters. Donald Curry was on the show with us and called in last week. Star Johnson, who put me in touch with them. Reggie Johnson, again, I'll say this because these guys, and Tim Witherspoon, these guys have all jumped in on the fray. And I've talked to the politicians about, and for those, let me explain where I'm going with this, because I think it's important. People that watch boxing, and they see that night that Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao and whoever the main events may be, these guys are making 100 or they're making 50 or $100 million, whatever it is. Great, because it's a rich sport, and I think they deserve every dollar they get. The problem that I'm having, that I've always had, I didn't just get this because I've been a person that's been a part of these pay-per-views with my brother in the past, so I know how it goes. The money that's made up here with these guys, and I'll continue to say it, that's made up here with these guys, right? The guys on the bottom rung, in a 4-rounder, 6-rounder, whatever they're using to open this fight up, are getting nowhere near that money. Even if they're getting $5,000, $10,000, and people seem to think that's a lot of money for one night, but it's not, because fighters get injured just like anywhere else, and a football player gets paralyzed, his career is over. Something happened with a boxer, it's the same exact thing. It's no different. So you're thinking, oh, wow, these guys are making $10,000 a night for a fight. Okay, yeah, but that's not any money. And I understand it's the profession that they picked. The problem is, this show is open and all the money is up here and none of it's down here. If you watch the basketball games with the Warriors and the Raptors and all the teams that made the playoffs, right? All of that money goes into one pot. It's not just one. The Warriors get a larger share. The Raptors got a larger share because they were the last two teams there. But all of the money feeds out to the other NBA teams and the players. There's a union. And the reason there's a union is because they realize that these basketball players' careers are short as well. Now, the union that just popped up maybe, I think, in the last 25 or 30 years. It wasn't there all the time. The same with the NFL. This didn't just pop up. It took some men, some guys had to give up some things. And I think I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, that Kurt Flood basically gave up his baseball career for free agency because he figured that a player should have, after a certain amount of time, a player should have the right to go to where he wanted to go. He gave up his career for this. Now, what we need, and as I've spoken to some politicians down in Texas, state of Texas, and we're about to embark on something that I know that the promoters, and I know that some of the fighters, the television people definitely won't like it, but you're going to have to pay. It's time that you're going to have to start making some of this money that you guys are making. It's going to have to be shared with the rest of the fighters, whether it's in Texas, whether it's in Nevada, whether it's in New York, whether it's Atlantic City, whether it's in California, New Jersey, I should say, California, you're going to have to pay. You're going to have to pay the piper now. For too long, these fighters have gone on. And I've said this before, but never in this format, because it's taken me to a point where I'm seeing the longer I live, the more and more I see fighters that put 10 years. How would you like to put something 10 years into something? And you put your sweat, you worked on a job for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, they set you go and you find out you had nothing. Nothing to hold it to. No Social Security to get to, no pension, no 401, just nothing. They just worked and let you go. Well, these fighters put their lives into the same thing every day. Their bodies they're risking their bodies every day. So you're going to have to share now. It's time to share. It's time out for this. I'm contacting a lot of my political friends that I have, and I've spoken with them. And they didn't understand it, but now they do. So you're going to have to start sharing. And this is going to be something that I'm going to be doing every week, and I'm going to be talking about this until it pops up. But we're going to make a law that when those big fights come to town, I don't care whether it's pay-per-view, any television money, you're going to contribute. The fighters are going to have to contribute as well now. I'm not saying just that, but it'll be a share that they can live with as well. It won't be a share where we just say, oh, it all has to come from TV. It all has to come from promoters. The fighters are going to put in, whether it's $3, $30, $300, $3,000. But you're going to, in order to make this thing work, because There's only so many Sugar Ray Leonards. There's only been so many Marvin Haglers, George Foremans, Larry Holmes, and a few others that I can think about that's doing well. But boxing put them to whatever level they're at rather. Boxing did it for them. I'd like to see the fight. So I would like to see a lot of those guys get more involved with it as well. So let's hope that within the next year, because I'm going to try my best to make this happen, and a bill will be introduced very soon, about sport that's going to help the sport of boxing, and we're going to do this. Then I want to thank Reggie Johnson and Star Johnson, Donald Curry for their input. There's a lot of other fighters. I ran Barkley, Tim Witherspoon, even Dave Tiberi out in over in Delaware, and all these guys are considering being a part of this thing because it's time to make it happen. Now, that's enough of me being on my pedestal. I know you don't want to hear that anymore. But back to the fight game itself, we got 3-4 good fights coming up within the next few weeks. Well, Tyson Fury just took place this week, and what do you really think about Tyson Fury? Tell me that. What do you think about Tyson Fury? Is he a jokester? He showed against Deontay Wilder that he should be taken seriously. He is a little bit more than a contender. He did have the heavyweight title. He's never lost a fight, So is he one of the guys that seriously be considered? I think you have to. For a guy his size, has pretty good foot movement, great hand movement, and everything else. He does things that he shouldn't be able to do. So last week he won a fight in the second round KO against a guy from Germany, kind of an nondescript opponent again, with that same word, nondescript. But that's pretty much what it is. That's the heavyweight division. Right now, he seems to be the most exciting globally, rather, that everybody's talking about. Luis, I said he just wanted to heavyweight title in a big upset, but except for Anthony Joshua and the people in the UK, I doubt if anybody else is kind of talking about him now, because over here, the United States just seems to be, okay, well, who was it? That's what I mean by no names. That's why people don't know. A lot of people have no idea that Andy Ruiz what it was. Guy asked me, was it the guy who used to be on 60 Minutes? I said, no, that was Andy Rooney. See, that's what I mean. That's the type of thing that boxers run into. Oh yeah, the guy used to be on. No, that was Andy Rooney, not Andy Ruiz, and he's dead now. I think Andy Rooney is dead. Ruiz may as well be when it comes to boxing. Errol Spence and Porter, I think I told you last week, has been moved into somewhere in oblivion. Terrence Crawford is in waiting. He's a man in waiting for one of these fights. But in the next coming weeks, you got the Charlo brothers again, who's back on his challenge again to try to get the title. One of the brothers is fighting on the 23rd in Las Vegas, which is this coming Saturday, as a matter of fact. And he's sitting there waiting to see what is Canelo going to do. I can tell you may as well keep on fighting, because right now Canelo is not going to face either one of you guys. Oscar De La Hoya is doing the best game in the world of hide and seek with this boy. I guarantee you that. And because Triple G should have been setting up for that third fight in September, but I'm seeing right now that's not going to. Oscar told him to go and beat somebody, a worthy fighter, then come into the thing. Like the other guys that Canelo is fighting is just so much more worthy. Not happening. Pacquiao and Keith Thurman. Now, that's the most interesting fight, I think, out of all of them for this year. Now, Mikey Garcia and Errol was a question mark, but we found out that was more like an exclamation point, because with a period, because Spence put the stop on, whooped him like he stole something. So that fight wasn't it. Thurman and Pacquiao on July the 20th, which is a pay-per-view fight again. It's probably going to generate, because of Manny Pacquiao's worldwide name, and the fact that a country follows him. The other part of the world, the whole Asian, they follow him. Numbers will be great with him. That's why everybody's kind of willing to take on him. Thurman from New York has a great following as well. I think most people seem to thought at one time he may have been the guy to run the welterweight division. Now he's going in as a B-side against Manny Pacquiao. Now, can he win this fight? Sure. He's a younger man, probably I'd say more powerful than Manny. The problem is Manny is one of the most schooled guys who's capable of doing some of anything in the ring. The guy can bounce around. He's 40-something years old. How he does it, I'd like to know. But Evidently, he trains hard. He's never tested positive for any drugs as of yet, PEDs or whatever they call them. So he must be doing a pretty good job of training. He keeps himself. And he's another guy that's fighting with a chip on his shoulder, because I think he still thinks to this day, a lot of people, that he let them down in the fight against Mayweather. He had a bad shoulder, he said, and he just couldn't throw punches like he wanted to. So he's fighting for something to prove himself well. And is that why he's fighting on? I don't know. Maybe he needs money. He's making a lot of money. You would think that he's made enough to kind of retire on, but this man helps support the country. So I think that's why he's in the process of, he keeps doing the things that he's doing. But here's a fight I think that Foreman should win if he wants to be considered, stay in this upper echelon and not become another Adrian Broner. He has to win. Okay? And I'm not, again, I don't know if you Pacquiao fan, of course you do. But I got a feeling that most of the people on the East Coast and from New York are pulling for Keith Thurman, because that's the closest I think that we're getting to having one of the fighters to bring in a major fight here in Atlantic City. He's the fact that he's in New York, but they bring the fight here, I can see it taking place. So it's it's one of those things. And but it's a good fight. And the fights that we'd like to see for next year, again, the winner of this particular fight, July 20th, Danny Garcia, we'd like to see him back in a major fight. Should he get by Danny? I mean, should he get by Mikey, which I think he will. Some people seem to think that maybe Mikey would get him. I don't see it happening. Danny, in his last fight, had something to prove, and he went out and fought like he had something to prove. And you know what you're going to have to do, Danny? You're going to keep the same kind of pressure, because I think that Spence didn't put the pressure on Mikey, because I think he gave him a little bit too much respect at the time, and he found himself into the later rounds. And, you know, if you're in there with those seasoned guys, if you haven't gotten them early, you can forget it. You're not going to get them. Terrence Crawford, next year, the round robin should be Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, the winner of Spence and Porter, I should say, Keith Thurman, and Manny Pacquiao. Hurd lost, but he's somewhere in the mix. That's what I see. Those are my those are the ones that I see. So hopefully next year, or by the time our next broadcast, somebody signs something. Or we're going to see, I think Wilder is due to fight Ortiz again. So will he have the title when he faces Fury, or will Ortiz be facing Fury instead of him? And then will Ortiz and Fury be facing Andy Ruiz? Tito says, as the world turns. Search for tomorrow. We'll see if you're a fan of the TV series, right? As the world turns, let's search for tomorrow, love of life, whatever it is. But that's what those guys are doing. I want to, again, thank Ali Williams here for letting us come into Vibes and broadcast this place. This is a nice place, guys. If you come to Atlantic City, if you're in Philadelphia, you drive down, or if you fly into Atlantic City, because I have a lot of friends that come into town. We're going to get over here. I think it's Thursday night, the event with Duran, or the Saturday night? Saturday night. Come by and meet the great one, the Hands of Stone himself, Roberto Duran. Then I'm going to get to covering his career one time. I'm going to try to bring you as often as I can the career of some of the great fighters, so you'll understand my passion for boxing is just what is a passion for boxing. I love the sport, and you know I have T-shirts of all kind of fighters that you can just about name. I've been there. I like. I'm like everybody else. I promote what I do, and this is the sport I love. But I want to thank you again for coming to The Choice. Let us tune into you. I want to thank Eddie Morgan for taking out from the time to come out here and visit us here at the same time, because as I said before, one of the greatest musicians in the history of Atlantic City. You see Eddie Morgan, man, it pops up like he's one of the heavyweight champions of the world. Well, maybe that's what it is, heavyweight champion of music in Atlantic City. That's the title we got to come up with. You know that? So we want to thank you for tuning in this week. And again, you can reach us at www.providetv.com. You can get us at www.royforeman.com. You can email us at roroboxing12@yahoo.com. And we want to thank you for tuning in. And as always, we'll see you at the fights.